Hi, welcome to the Women Money Business podcast. I'm Dr. Priti Basra, and today I've got with me Nav Aujla. And Nav is from the Warwick Business School. And I'll let you introduce yourself, Nav, if that's okay. A little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Nav. I work at Warwick Business School, and I've been there for over 5 years now, working in business development in the
Okay.
executive education space.
So how did that journey start, Nav? Did you always know that, you know what, that's what I want to do in life, or how did that happen?
By accident. So it was definitely not by design, Pretty. So I kind of,
Okay.
like many people, chose my subject that I'm going to go
Mhm.
to university at 18. And whether that's
Okay.
wise or not, I don't know. Making such career decisions at the
Yeah.
age of 18 is wise or not. And I didn't follow the career path that I thought I was going to follow.
Okay.
At that time, it was law. I studied law and accounting, and I didn't go into law and I didn't go into accounting
Fair
um,
enough.
for many reasons. But I kind of landed in education, and I've never really looked back. And that was at the time, I think I was kind of looking for a role where, in my mind, I just wanted to travel.
Okay.
And I had this kind of like fascination about wanting my work to involve travel. And I came across this role in a university, not this role, but a role in a university that involved travel. And it gave me, lots of fulfillment. But being in the education space, obviously, I'm around learning all the time. And as a curious person, it's a great space to be. And I've never really looked back, but it was definitely not by design, Pretty. And
Okay.
I think many people kind of find that they choose something and they actually follow
Something.
a completely different path. So
I
I think
mean,
that's
if you
another
think back,
discussion for another day for about whether
yeah,
you
that's
choose
it.
something at the age of 18 and whether that's what you're going to follow.
That's it. That's what I was going to say. Like, can you imagine now, like thinking back to when you were 18, that I had to choose basically what I'm going to do for potentially the rest of my life at 18? Like, I don't know what clothes I was meant to be wearing when I was 18, like in the morning and stuff, but to choose your career path. And I think some of us are quite fortunate, quite a rarity, I suppose, that know what they want to do at such an early age. But the vast majority is a little bit trial and error, and like you say, like a bit of an accident in some cases. So why did you choose law and accounting? What was the reason
Oh
for that?
gosh. I think it was what was timely at that time, Pretty. I mean, we had
Yeah.
there's the OJ Simpson case going on. There was lots
Okay.
of stuff happening. There were TV programs that were quite popular, and it kind of led to this decision. And it was kind of a known profession. You
Hmm.
do law, you do accounting,
Yeah.
you become a doctor. Funnily enough, it
Yeah.
wasn't driven by my family. They kind of had
Right.
suggested other things. Had I listened to them, I might be on a different career path. But I kind of just
Right.
thought, oh, this looks interesting. I didn't know much about the area itself and what the career might actually entail. So yeah, my choices were probably not driven for the right reasons, but at
Right
that
reason.
time, and when you're 18, I think you know what you know, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's quite interesting is that you mentioned that you weren't driven by your parents, and I think there's a bit of element of obviously being Asian and the Asian community back then. Like, I want to say, like, back then things were slightly probably different there, where I think a lot of Asian community people resonate with the fact that they were maybe pushed a little bit by their parents wanting them to go into certain professions because they were deemed as good professions. But then on the flip side of that, like where you've just mentioned that you would wanted to travel, and how was that conversation in the house, like at the age of 18, you saying that you wanted to go into a job that where you could travel? How was that received?
Luckily for me, I've got quite open-minded parents, so
Hmm.
it wasn't something that was frowned upon or kind of advised that I stay away from that. It was always encouraged that you do what you do. I think my father especially, he's always kind of said, just do something you're good at, because if you do
Okay.
something you're good at, you're going to do well in it. So just do something you're good at. And I think
Hmm.
that's great for anybody. It's kind of, and even at this stage, Pretty, if you ask me what you want to be when you're older, I still don't know. I'm still
Don't know.
learning, and I'm still kind
Yeah.
of like open to ideas. I don't think you ever stop kind of wanting to continue to grow, and so you can start out on something and realize, well, actually, I want to go
Yeah.
this way and that way. And nowadays, that's more acceptable, isn't it? We have these careers
Yeah.
where we're like this, rather than going,
Yeah.
straight down
That you
the
pick
ladder. Or
this and you're going to go down. And
yeah,
then, so what would your day to day involve then, Nav? Like, what would you do on a day to day basis? Because obviously, I know the title is business development manager, and there's some marketing elements in that, I assume. What does that look like?
I mean, in the day-to-day, I guess relationship building is a big part of what I do. So building relationships with the faculty who are then going to come and teach on the programs, building relationships with, the execs that we work with who are then going to come onto the programs. So relationship building is a big part of it. And I think relationship building is a big part of anything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're in my world and it's something corporate, or it's whether in your world it's entrepreneur, being an entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
you've got to be good at building relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and looking back, that's something that you don't really get taught in
Yeah.
your degree, or when you start out your career, that is going to be a massive part of anything that you do. It's that
Yeah.
relationship building piece.
And how did you find that sort of, I mean, I don't know what the sort of sector is like in terms of where you're working, but is there a difference between male and females in that sector? And is it more difficult to build a relationship with being female? And I'm imagining sort of like boardrooms and corporate sort of settings. What is that like?
I think that persists in every sector and every
Mm-hmm.
way of business, because there are massive in this sector. I don't think it's controversial to say that there is gender the equality issues in the sector that I'm in.
No, no.
And
Yeah.
then it's quite open that there are, and in many sectors that, there's data to support that if you're a female, it is a little bit harder. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the challenges obviously has been being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So I walk into the room and I'm a woman. So straight away, I'm at, maybe in some rooms at a disadvantage. But then I have double jeopardy. I'm an Asian woman. So walking into the room and I'm an Asian woman, I've got almost like double jeopardy. So the stats for me are even more, negative.
Against
So
you.
yeah, against me. So, and then we speak, and I have, a high pitched voice. I don't have a low pitched voice, and the preference is that, a lower, deeper voice,
Yes.
is more dominant. So, being a woman, yeah, instantly there are, marks against you that people are perceiving you differently, and in my world, and in probably yours as an entrepreneur. So, if you look at the stats, there's the Full Set Society, and they came up with these stats around women who feel like they've been passed over promotion. So if you're white and you're a
Mm.
woman, 27% of women will feel like they've been passed over for promotion. But if you're a
Right.
woman of color, that percentage kind of increases to something like 47%. So the number is a lot
Wow.
higher if you're,
Wow.
so that's when I talk about the double jeopardy. So it does exist. And
Yeah.
the kind of data is there to support that if you're a woman of color, and, like myself, if I'm a woman of color, the challenges are a little bit more against you, I guess. And in your world as well, being an entrepreneur, I mean, you could look at the stats. There's the British Business Bank, and they've got some really interesting stats.
Yeah.
So last year they reported the number of deals done for women where the teams were all female founders was only 163. And in kind of
Wow.
monetary terms, that equates to something like £232 million. And you
Mm-hmm.
compare it for men in the same year, there was over 1,413 deals being completed.
That's
And
shocking,
in
isn't it?
monetary terms, in terms of value, that's something like 6.5 billion. So there's bias there against females versus males in any industry that you're
Yeah.
in.
And like, probably this is much deeper discussion than probably like this podcast, but I cannot understand. Is it because people like females feel like, do you get like a section of females that'll think, well, I'm not going to get it, so I'm not going to go for it. So that's what maybe one barrier. And then the other barrier is ones that do go for it, are you then perceived as, because you're not as domineering, or you don't carry yourself in a certain way, that you're not fit for the, like, where does it come into play? What about the skill set? What skills have you got, rather than what do you look like, and are you female or are you Asian? I just find it baffling that I know it exists in every sector. And I literally was reading an article yesterday that came through one of the opticians magazines, and they're talking about the gender pay gap in optics. And it's just shocking. Like, I cannot understand it, with like it being a heavily female profession in my sector. Why as females are you getting paid less when you are almost the dominant profession, but yet males are getting paid more? Like,
I think
What
we
are your
don't
thoughts on
ask for
that?
enough sometimes, Pretty. I think
Yeah,
as women,
yeah,
we're quite self-deprecating, aren't we? If you say to me, come on my podcast and talk about your successes, Nav, I'm like, no. But if you say,
yeah,
come
yeah,
on my
yeah,
podcast, Nav, and talk about all the mistakes you've made in life, I'm like, yeah,
yeah, let's do
I'm
it.
ready
Yeah,
for that. Let me talk about all the mistakes I've made in my life, but I'm more hesitant to talk about
yeah,
me being successful. And I think we don't think big enough sometimes, Pretty, because
yeah,
we are,
yeah,
as women, sometimes, I don't, whether it's humble or whether we're just kind of, we're not brave enough to think bigger sometimes as
yeah,
our male counterparts. So we just need to think bigger sometimes and ask for more and
yeah,
not be
yeah.
afraid to ask for more. Um, and when I started up Pretty ago, when I started out my career, I was naive in thinking that it's going to be, I've got my degrees, I'm good to go. Let's climb the ladder. I work really hard. I know I'm going to be
Yeah.
successful. And it was learning the hard way that actually performance is only a small part of it. So being good at what you do is actually just the start of it. It's the small part of it. And you've
Mhm.
probably come across, managers who you've gone, how have they got there? They're not that
Yeah,
good. And
yeah,
you kind of question it and you go, well, I'm still sitting here. How are my counterparts who
yeah,
are
yeah.
not delivering as much as me now climbing the ladder?
Mhm.
Um, and I got introduced to this model and it really resonates with me. It's the PI model. So it's a book by Harvey Coleman. It's called Empowering Yourself,
Okay.
the organizational game revealed. And in that PI model, he talks about only 10% being performance
What?
related
Okay.
to success. And the other parts are 30% are image. And then 60% is visibility. And it's that part that I've always really struggled with, Pretty, being visible.
Well, yeah. So,
But
what does that mean? What does that translate into? Nav
so
visibility.
speaking up at the right times in
Okay.
meetings, being, present in certain spaces, being in rooms where you're showing up and being present. So visibility is quite a difficult thing sometimes for women, just physically being visible.
Mhm.
There was a time when I was working on a large project and I put my heart and soul into it. But on the day it came to deliver it, I couldn't be available physically because I had to take care of my children. So it was kind of,
Right.
it's sometimes just being physically visible for us women can be difficult, especially when we're caregivers. But I think visibility for women is kind of a bit of a risk taking, and we're risk averse naturally, more
Yeah, yeah,
risk
yeah.
averse. So it's kind of like if I speak up or if I say something, how I'm going to be perceived. I
Mhm.
might say something wrong, and how will people then still see me as an expert? So I think visibility for me, especially, was always really difficult, and it's the one that I've always kind of thought is my Hercules heel.
Yeah,
And it's something that people have always kind of said, you need to be more visible. I'm like, I don't want to be visible. I want my
yeah,
work to
yeah.
be visible, not me.
Yeah, you
Um,
want to be known for what you've done rather than who you are, I suppose. And I think that
yeah,
probably resonates. Like I think, like you say, it's a female thing. I don't know why. It's probably something that's quite archaic that's been sort of passed along in.
Yeah,
I don't
somewhere in
know.
our psyche that still something
Yeah,
exists that we need to be shy and timid and reserved.
yeah. Or we need to
And
be looked after, or we need to be protected. Whereas, like you don't. Like you can come forward and be you. But it's quite. I would 100% resonate with that because with myself, like I have my business and I have brands, and up until probably a couple of months ago, I would never say to anybody I've got two businesses, and obviously you've probably
yeah,
seen my LinkedIn now. I'm like, I've got two businesses, but I would never say that out loud. And people would say to me, why don't you, why don't you say that, you've got that, you do that, or you do that. And I'm like, because I don't need to, because I know what I do. But then, like you say, if you don't just talk about what you do, you're not visible.
yeah.
Like
And I think
that
that's
makes,
just right there, is it? You know what you do, Pretty, but
yeah,
how will someone else know what you do
yeah,
unless you tell them? And I think you've got to
yeah,
be more confident in kind of going, this is what I do. And,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that,
yeah.
that could be a small meeting, it could be a bigger meeting, it could be a conference, but saying what we do and being proud of what we're doing and talking about it is something that I think we all need to get comfortable with, especially as women, and share more about what we're doing and be proud to say what we're doing.
And have you found when, in terms of like you've just said, sort of telling people, sharing what you're doing, have you ever been in a situation where you're in a meeting and maybe you're not being not I don't want to use the term vocal because I don't, that's not what I mean, but as in you're not maybe forthcoming of your background or your role or your experience, but when if at some point in that meeting you then express like, oh, by the way, I this is my background, this is what I do, etc., etc. Do you feel things switch when you're in that setting? Has that happened before?
I think there's two things. I think there's a slight conundrum. So sometimes when we are being more visible, the system doesn't always see us. So you can be trying to, make you think, oh, I'm doing all the right things. I'm trying to be visible here, but then the system doesn't always see us. And it goes back to, for example, the investment. Women trying to get investment. They're out there and they're trying to get their investment, but look, there's this bias going on. They're not being seen, are they? And
No.
similar, that's a lot of venture capitalist firms are mainly male, so there's this male bias at play
Yeah.
going on. And similarly, in organisations, a lot of leadership teams are male, so there is still some male bias at play somewhere. So I think these systems have been built and these constructs have been built, but sometimes they're not always seeing us, even when we are trying to be visible.
Yeah. And I think it's funny that you've just mentioned that, because literally about an hour ago, somebody's messaged me, who's an optometrist, and she's saying that she's struggling to get finance to buy a business, about optician's practice. She's not deemed, she feels that she's not seen as that she can run a business from the potential sellers that she's approached. And she's now thinking of emigrating, like
Wow.
I know. So I was just that's quite a big leap to make. But then at the same time, I just think, how long has she had these nuances where she's been thinking, I'm not seen as equal, I'm not given the same opportunities, and you kind of, I'm not saying that you're 100% right, all the decisions are made by males, but then if there is that sort of preference toward, if it is sort of males in that higher positions, and there's that unconscious bias. They might not even be doing it consciously. It's that unconscious bias, like, I like you, I know you, you look like me, or you resonate with me, so you can get it over the female that's got 3 children, and I don't know whether she can commit to it, and is she safe to give my money to. So it's interesting to talk about, but it's a shame to hear the real life
That is when
experience
it
of
plays out
somebody.
in real life and it's somebody's
Exactly. Yes.
experience.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that is difficult. And there are steps I think we can take to kind of mitigate some of that. And off this podcast
Yes.
previously, we talked about networking, haven't we, Pretty? And
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think networking is such an important thing, whether
Yeah.
you're in industry or whether you're an entrepreneur. That the networking, a lot of this is taking, a lot of discussion, a lot of things are happening when you're not in the room, or and you need to be in those rooms. And then the reason why we kind of advocate for networking in business schools, everyone will advocate for networking, because a lot of times, I mean, we spoke about those bad managers, they might not have been great at what they have done, but most of them will most likely have had a sponsor who has championed them along the way. Similarly, when you're in that entrepreneur space and you're trying to seek funding, having a sponsor, can make a huge amount of difference, as well as having a mentor. Someone who's already in that space who can kind of guide you along makes a massive difference. And the networking also gives you a support network. It's a space where you can go in a safe space and talk to people about what you might be experiencing.
And how would you tackle this if you were quite introverted? So I know that I've read some sort of stuff about, like, people that are entrepreneurial or sort of in the business space can be quite introverted. And so how would you approach that in a networking setting if you are that kind of person?
Because okay, you're walking into a big space and there's lots of people there and lots of conversations taking place, but I think it's a perfect space for introverts, because most conversations in that room are going to be one-to-one
Yeah.
conversations. And
Yeah.
if most of us, some of us are not comfortable with these large spaces and talking to a huge audience, networking isn't really that, is it? It's you walking into a large space, but your conversations are so one-to-one.
Absolutely.
So I think it's wise to remember that there's so much to gain from those one-to-one conversations, and it could be a safe space and it could be more intimate than how networking is almost perceived and described. For me, it's never been like that. It's always been a comfortable space for me, because I can have those more meaningful one-to-one chats with people.
And I think that's exactly, you've hit the nail on the head when you say networking. I don't know how many people envisage like a massive room full of people, everyone's going to be looking at you. But like you say, it's, you just have those little conversations going on, little micro groups. Often it's one-to-one. So, well, what are you here for? And I think if you haven't done something like that before, it can be sort of, your expectations are a little bit well, unrealistic maybe, but you don't realize, like, I recently had a business student actually reach out to me. She's in the final year at university, and she was saying, I want to go to networking events. What would you recommend? But then I don't feel I can give her my recommendations, but then I would be really interested to know, what would you say if you were, when you were first starting out, what would you recommend in terms of networking events? Because networking can mean anything, can't it, really? It's a broad
Yeah.
spectrum.
So that has always been a part of my career, has been networking. It's something that kind of just always existed in every role that I've done. So for me, it's always been just part of the norm. It's something that I kind of do. But if you're just starting out and it's your first time and you're kind of venturing into networking, for the business student, for example, there will be like a whole host of things that she or he can get involved
Yeah.
in that university space. You know, some smaller events that they first start to attend, and it could be, I don't know, an alumni coming back and giving a lecture, and you attend that and then you stick around at the end for a conversation. So there's going to be, in that space, lots of, you know, different arenas that this person can kind of entertain. But if you're not in that space and you're, you know, in industry, etc., and you want to step into it, there are some great women networking groups that you can get part of, and they are such great places because it's women supporting other women,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just fantastically safe spaces to go out and just try it. And eventually it's like you've done your first one and the
That's
second one
it.
will become easier. It's practice. It's like anything. Once you've done it,
Mhm.
it becomes easier.
And in terms of, with you mentioning that women networking events, and obviously you've got your traditional networking events as well. Would you say, obviously, in terms of the women one, it's women supporting women, so you would feel a lot more safer, like you say. What would be the advantages of not going to, like, obviously you could go to women's one. What would be the advantages of going to a mixed one, just say?
Oh, that's such a good question, and it's really important. Actually, I'm glad you asked it, Pretty, because yes, we know we should have women mentors and stuff, but it's also really important to have someone who doesn't look like you. And if men are getting ahead and men are, you know, doing really well, we should be learning from them, and we should kind of be, and you know, going back to them and kind of going, I did this, you know, I did it like this. I really would appreciate your feedback. How would you have done that? It's
Yeah.
really important to have mentors who don't always, you know, look like us.
Mhm.
Um, because there's so much more to learn, because we know we can do it this way, but from somebody who doesn't look like us, or a man, for example, you could learn something different and a different perspective. So I think it's so important to have, you
To
know,
do both.
to do both, and have like maybe somebody in who's a man, and kind of go, well, how would you have approached
How would you
this?
do it?
Like
And
even
in
your
terms,
friend who's going through like the, you know, looking for investment and stuff, just going out there networking and maybe finding somebody in that space, even a male in that space. Well, how would you do it? How would you
yeah,
approach this?
and it's just having that difference of the different thought process, or the different approaches, really, isn't it? Because it's often, regardless of sort of gender, you can speak to 5 different people and they've got 5 different ways of doing something, and you just have to figure out the way that works for you. In terms of, I was going to ask a question, I've forgotten now, I think. In terms of it was to do with the network. Yeah, in terms of, you mentioned mentors, and would you traditionally say that that would be a good place to find a mentor when you're going network? Like,
Absolutely.
would that
Yeah.
be what you would do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could find your mentor in any space,
Mhm.
because a mentor doesn't necessarily have to do exactly what you do, but they
You
can
do.
kind of guide you. So networking is a great place to find mentors. And the type of person you're going to meet at a networking event is open to all this already. So you're
Yeah,
in a great space because you're already like ticking loads of boxes. You're with like-minded people. Um, but yeah, definitely it's a great, you know, space to find a mentor. But I think, like, going back to saying that it's a space that you need to be in. If you've
yeah,
got certain goals and you've got certain things that you want to achieve, someone like your business student coming, you know, and asking about networking is great, because we talk about the hidden job market,
mhm.
and, you know, like 70-75% of jobs are never even advertised. They're
Oh
happening
wow.
in a hidden market. So for your business student, going out there now and talking, who's already thinking about networking, is a great starting point.
And in terms of, like, for example, if you are in that setting, and you sort of, with, look like you find somebody there, would you just ask, would you just say, like, you know what, like, would you be happy to mentor me? And is there, so from what I understand mentoring to be, often it'll be somebody that's wanting to sort of help you, but there may or may not be a financial payment that needs to be made for that, because often they're doing it because they just want to support you because they've been through what you've been through, or they can sort of resonate with what you're going through and add, sort of give you some advice. And then so that's sort of the one part of the question, and then the other part is obviously the coaching side, like how does that fit in?
So with a mentor, I think it's good to know something about your mentor. And you've got to understand yourself. Why am I reaching out to this person? Why do I want them to be my mentor? And then explaining that to them is obviously going to help them buy into wanting to be your mentor. So, I know that you do X, Y, Z. I'm really, I would really love if you mentored me for these reasons. So yeah, knowing, who you're going to approach and why is, do a bit of homework on them and make sure it is the right mentor for you. And sometimes you'll find that isn't the right mentor for you, and you can kind of move on from it. So it's kind of, but yeah, make sure you're choosing the right person for the right reasons. And then coaching, you don't, have to be in that space. Anybody you could reach out to a coach. The coach kind of is there to kind of get you from this goal to that goal almost. So at any stage of your career, I do advocate coaching. It's just great for someone, just for you to, especially when you're an entrepreneur or a leader and it's quite lonely in that space. It's good just to air out what you're thinking and kind of just have time to reflect and put those thoughts into a coherent pattern.
And in terms of, like, we talk about mindset a lot, and it's very sort of current, I think, over the past few years, like the whole side of mindset. And then I think there's obviously, you've got your growth mindset and then you've got your entrepreneurial mindset. What would you say that the difference? Would you say there's some crossover there? There's similarities, differences? What would your view be on that?
There's obviously some similarities in your growth mindset, because an entrepreneur, when we study what makes an entrepreneur, the growth mindset is actually part and parcel of being an entrepreneur. So most entrepreneurs that we kind of look at have a growth mindset. There's this curiosity. And that's might lead you to your business idea in the first place, but there is a real appetite for curiosity and for learning and wanting to do something slightly different. So that is a big part of it. And I think for any leader or anybody who's in that entrepreneurial space, having a growth mindset is just a really important, tool to have.
So you mentioned, obviously, you've got double jeopardy in terms of being female and Asian. What about when you add being a mom into it? How does that change things?
So yeah, that is a challenge, obviously, because you're juggling so much. And you have like your 9 to 5 and what I call then your 5 to 9, and obviously you're diverting your attention and energy. So yeah, when I was first starting my career, I didn't really appreciate how difficult that can be. I never really, I thought I had put myself in people's shoes when they were telling me this, that it's really hard being a mum and being in the workspace. But until you experience and live it, you just don't understand how hard it can be. And you have to switch, you have to almost change how you operate. So for me, really pretty, it became about really managing my time and becoming efficient. Like every minute counts. I haven't got time to now go in the corridor and talk to people. I've got to be really efficient with my time. And I've kind of grown to loathe meetings for meeting's sakes, or meetings that are taking up too much of my time, or whether there's no end point or there's nothing being done, because I've got into this space now that every minute counts. So I think on the positive side, it's made me more efficient. It's made me a better worker in that sense, that I am now so efficient with my time, and I know that by a certain time or this has to be done. So I haven't got time to go and chat or waste my time. So in some ways it's made me more efficient. But it does, obviously it's more challenging, and especially like when we talk about visibility, and there are still a lot of organizations that are so prescribed in that you have to be in the office 3 times a week, and to that to me doesn't equate to being visibility, and that to me is not conducive to working well or a good work culture, because that doesn't mean anything. You could go into an office and you could sit there 3 days a week and there might not be anybody else around you. So but there are still places that still try and prescribe this kind of like, this is what visibility is. That's not what I see as being visible. I think you've got to be at the right space at the right time. But yeah, so I think when you then throw in the mix of having kids, definitely. I think the constructs and systems still are not designed for women, pretty. Like,
Okay.
even, like, these are constructs and systems that were designed for men in the 1950s when the woman was working from home, and they've not really changed or evolved that much.
Mhm,
And when we're trying to change them, there are still people who want to hold on to these old constructs. But
mhm,
going
mhm.
forward, I would hope going forward, pretty, that, with technology and with people's evolving mindsets around what is, a good work-life balance, that these things start to change. And the only way they will change is if we keep challenging them.
Absolutely. And I think back, like, when obviously when COVID happened, there's been such a massive shift. I think if we look back to, like, say 5 years ago, I think the work-life balance on paper does look better, because obviously you've got your flexible working arrangements in terms of not just hours, but that you can work from home. But then on the flip side of that, I've seen people that are working from home, but because they're being so much more efficient, they're actually getting through so much more work, but then they can't actually switch off because it's just they're in the office all the time because the office is a laptop.
Yeah.
Have you found that at all? Like, or have you come
Um,
across that?
So, pretty, for me, that this is such an important thing, because we, especially in the Western world, we focus so much on, the mind and working and stuff, but we never really have looked at, like, holistically. We are
Mm.
human,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we do need to switch off. And sitting at your desk and chugging coffee and working like 9 hours relentlessly on screen, that's not going to, in the long run, serve you well, because you want to be like, and I always look to sports psychology, Preeti, and I always think, well, a sports player, they have their basics in tune, don't they?
mhm,
Your food, your exercise,
yeah,
your sleep. And I always
yeah,
throw, for me, meditation and prayer in the mix. And I know if these are out of tune, I ain't going to be my best, and
yeah,
I'm not going to be making the best decisions. So I
yeah,
think you've got to be kind to yourself. And when
yeah,
I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed and I can't shut off, I know I've either got to go for a swim, I've got to
yeah,
stop, I've either got to just sit down in a dark room and do some meditation or prayer. So it's knowing kind of what works for you. And I'm really, I'm a big believer in this mind, body, and soul.
mhm,
And I think more so, in business, we're talking more about holistically the whole person. And I think those things have got to be in tune for you to make good decisions. So, if you're not switching off at the end of the day because you're sitting at home and you're working relentlessly on this screen, you've got to find what works for you, whether that's, I'm going to stop and I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to sit in a dark room just for 10 minutes and I'm just going to absorb a different
going
energy.
on,
So
yeah,
yeah, I'm a big
yeah.
believer in going back to basics, pretty, and I don't think you can be at your best in anything unless those basics are right.
And I think sometimes, though, when you're in that conundrum where you're on that hamster wheel, you don't see what you're doing. Others around you will see that, you know what, like, this is not normal. I mean, how do you encourage somebody to sort of come out of that? Like, you almost want to pick them up out the hamster wheel and put them on the floor and just be like, look, this is what you're doing. Like, how would you? I'm not saying you know everything about everything, but I just suppose your opinion, really. Like, how
I
would you
think
tackle
you
that?
know yourself when you've got to stop.
Mm,
Um, and it goes back to, having the right people around you, because when you've got the right people around you, they will say to you, it's time to stop,
yeah,
it's time
stop
to
now.
take a break.
Yeah,
So I think intuitively, when you're kind of need that break, and you've got to be kind to yourself and kind of go, yes, this is not going to work. If I'm going to be relentlessly doing this, and I'm going to be on this hamster wheel, somewhere along the line, it's not going to serve me well. And it's just
mhm,
knowing that, actually going back to the basics, and being kind to yourself and going food, exercise, sleep,
yeah, yeah,
meditation,
yeah,
prayer, those things, we don't kind of factor them into our working lives, and we don't factor them into making money. Like, we don't talk about that in the
yeah,
business world.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
how does this help us make money? But it does in
It
the long
does. It
run.
does. Yeah,
So it's kind
yeah.
of bringing that language back into into your business world again. Well, actually, this is basics of business. If I can't do this,
Well, and I think sometimes it gets lost, doesn't it? Because I think if you've not had a good night's sleep, if you've not been eating properly in the day, it reflects in everything that you do. But I think, like you say, when you're working in your business and maybe not on your business, you fail to recognise those cues, really, because when you have had a good night's sleep and you've had a nice meal, that's good for your body. you feel more positive and you're actually more productive really than trying to just like,
Absolutely.
you know, yeah.
So yeah, I don't think I think sometimes the business world makes those words seem like, oh God, I can't do that, I
Yeah.
can't take a break. But I
Yeah, yeah,
think we
yeah,
should
yeah.
incorporate those things into your leadership or your, your
Yeah,
business, because those are so, so important
yeah.
to the long term, the long vision, because you need those things to start with.
Everything. Yeah, absolutely. And so just finally then, Nav, what kind of sort of what would be your advice to your younger self, and maybe just like a top tip that you would give to any of the listeners based on sort of your life experience to date and your career journey, professional journey?
I mean, in terms of top tips, there's this thing, I don't know if it would be what I go back to and say to my younger self, pretty, but it's something that I've come across recently. I'm like, I'm going to share this with everybody. It's like gold. And it's this principle around having a scarcity mindset where, and this is what in business we're taught, the scarcity mindset, that
Yeah,
you have competitors, that, there's only so much of this market share. You have to get this and your gain is going to be my loss. And we're taught this scarcity mindset. But the opposite of that is this abundance mindset. And I love this
yeah,
concept.
yeah,
And this abundance mindset is, is the opposite of that. It is, there's enough for everybody.
yeah,
Um, share, knowledge share. It's a great thing. Support other women, in your networks. And, but mainly it's about going back to gratitude and kind of saying to yourself, I'm not going to focus on what I don't have. I'm going to focus on what I do have. And
yeah,
that's the start of the abundance mindset. And then I think a lot of your, listeners, and we are all going into the new year, and we'll be reflecting on what we've achieved this year and what do we want
yeah,
to gain next year. And I think setting the intention is really important. And we talk about in coaching, setting the goal or setting the intention. But in times in my life when I have been honest about my intention and that I truly want to gain this, or and write that
yeah,
goal down and refer to it every day and try to work towards it, is the times when it's kind of worked for me. So
yeah,
I think that would be my kind of key takeaway, that if going into this new year, it's not woo-woo just doing your New Year's resolution, that there is some real science and data and truth
yeah,
around setting your intention, setting your goal. And as women, I think sometimes we limit our goals and we're quite, quite reserved in what we're mapping
yeah,
out for ourselves.
yeah,
But to think big, because if we use the abundance mindset and there's loads out there, enough for
absolutely.
everybody, you
Yeah.
can work on making your goals even bigger.
And how do you feel about vision boards then finally, Nav? Like, how do you sort of
I
believe
have
in
one on
those?
my screen,
Yeah,
pretty, and I see it every time I open my screen, and it's just these pictures of what's important to me. So there's one for
yeah,
meditation, there's one, what we spoke about health and stuff. So I,
yeah.
I open my laptop and it's the first thing I
And it's
see,
there for you.
and it's there for me. So
Yeah,
definitely, and there's some truth to, there's people who talk about manifesting, and it does sound a bit
yeah,
like, oh, manifest this, but it goes back to, it's just setting a goal, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
just being clear about what you want to achieve, and then you can kind of work your way into, now I'm going to achieve this. So
yeah,
and going back and talk about sports people, they know what their goal is. They know that they've got to go in
yeah,
there and they've got to win X, and that's their goal.
yeah,
So I think it's a
absolutely.
great thing to have a vision board. And it's great to be really clear in what your goals is and what you want to achieve.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And is just on final one, is there any books that you've read like over the years that you've just thought, "Do you know what, that was a really good book that I would recommend everyone to read that? Have you ever come across a book like
Yes.
that?
Oh yes. So The
Yeah.
Source by Dr. Tara Swart is such a great book.
Okay.
And and in there they talk about the abundance mindset in that as well. So it's a great read, and it's a really
Okay.
easy read. And if you're going into a new year, I think it's a great one to read, because they talk about goal setting and how to
Okay.
do it.
Yeah.
So that's a great read.
The Source. Yeah. Perfect. So thank you so much for joining today, Nav. It's been really great to speak to you and just to listen to your journey, and also all the sort of top tips and everything that you've sort of explained in terms of business, and obviously the networking side is really interesting as well. So thank you again, and I'll see you guys on the next one.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Pretty.